Why is Ruth, first of all, the story that we read on Shavuos, and why is she the heroine that we know of, okay? And sometimes I personally think that for a leader to be impactful and to make a difference, it's so important to understand the time period, right? Martin Luther King was particularly impactful because of the time period that he lived in, right? Certain individuals had their mark, had their impact because of the surrounding times. I think that is so true about Megillas Ruth. And we have to understand what was the time period, what was happening then, to understand what made her unique, and what contributions did she make, what lesson did she embody, okay? So let's go to source number one. Okay, this is the time period of the Shoftim. So after Moshe dies and Yoshua takes over, now we have the time period of the judges. There are 15 judges. And the second source, the Sefer itself, the book itself tells us that in those days, in Melech B'Yisrael, there was no king. This wasn't the ideal Jewish leadership. And Ish Hayashar Be'inav Yaseh, everybody would do whatever they wanted. It was kind of like a free-for-all. And I kind of, when I read this, it really makes me think a little bit of our generation in the sense that no matter which political party you go for, if it's not your own, I don't really buy into it, right? So whether it was the last president or this president, if it's not in line with what I believe, then it's almost like I'll make memes to make fun of it, right? And I'll pass around jokes how like it doesn't apply to me, and I might even like make riots about it. But certainly, what's certainly true is I don't have to buy into you. And this notion of like, I only listen to what makes sense to me or if it works for me, I personally think reflects a lot of our personal generation, in my opinion. And I think the reason why this is so important is not just on a political level, like, hey, when our nation doesn't listen to one leader, we have havoc, okay? But I think that notion of not listening to authority, that authority is questionable, really filters into other aspects of our lives and our children's lives. So when the authority is questionable on a political level, you know, when I see some of my friends post very, very strong political memes on their WhatsApp statuses, and I'm totally politically, like, not passionate as I am about everything in life, politics, thankfully, just doesn't do it for me. So when I see, like, a flaming, like, demeaning meme, sometimes I want to wonder, like, I just need her to realize demeaning to authority on a political level is going to be demeaning on a parenting level, on a teacher level, and what's scariest for me in my position is also on a religious level. Meaning, if I can't handle authority on a political level or on a parenting level or on a school level, then the ultimate authority of the world, why do I have to listen to him? And that's probably like the typical question I get, not just working in Beth Tefillah, in Bnei, in all schools. That's a question that teens are burning with. And in fact, Christian Smith, who did studies and wrote a book on this, says, for most teens, nobody has to do anything in life, including anything to do with religion. Whatever is just fine if that's what a person wants. Consequently, certain traditional religious languages and vocabularies of commitment, duty, faithfulness, obedience, calling, obligation, accountability, and ties to the past are nearly completely absent from the discourse of U.S. teens. This notion of nobody can tell me what to do because authority is not no one to tell me anything, that's something that's filtering out, again, not just in the political realm and not just in our parenting and not just in our classrooms, which it is, but really also on a religious level. And the reason why this is so important, and Rav Hirsch, whose entire life was fighting this mentality, and my husband comes from him, so we're like particularly feel connected to Rav Hirsch, and he says, this is the word, the Torah, right, which is meant to transform our entire life in order to bring us peace and blissfulness on earth. This is the word upon whose unaltered observance, and he says, how dare we mutilate this divine word, steal from its true life-fulfilling content? How dare we prune it to fit our pattern from other teachings, delusionary teachings which it indeed was sent to overcome? How dare we rob it of its life-governing mission and dilute it until it is a mere faith that is to be professed between dreams and waking? Essentially, when we try to change it, it's not going to be what it was meant to be and have the impact on our lives that it was meant to and should have on our lives. So now I get to what made Ruth the perfect model. What was she the perfect antidote to this generation? Okay, and that brings us to probably the most famous line in the entire Megillah. It happens to be, it's not my favorite line in the entire Megillah. I'm so sad today, I'm going to try to squeeze it in, but maybe next week I'll try to do an angle with my favorite line in the Megillah, but this is the most famous for sure, okay? And that is, of course, when, does anybody need a recap of the story? Just like Cliff Notes for us? I'll just do it super quickly. Cliff Notes of the story is, sometimes when I teach in Bnei and I'm like, whatever, and they're like, we don't know what you're talking about. Okay. Cliff Notes of the story is there's this family, husband's name is Elimelech, wife is Naomi, they have these two sons, Jaclyn and Kehillas. is a famine that breaks out in the land of Israel. Elimelech, although he is exorbitantly wealthy and can handle living throughout not only himself throughout this famine and drought, but he can totally support many other families through it. Decides he really doesn't want to have those people knocking at his door on Sunday night. It's a really, they always come at bedtime, maybe in Pickwick, you get freed from that. But where I live, it's so not enjoyable. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, they aggressively bring the
Yeah, and it's it's 6 o'clock, bedtime dinner. Come in an hour. My father once said to me, he's like, Jaclyn, you'd rather be on your side of the door than their side of the door. So that is true. That is true. Still timing. But they move to Moab of all places, which is a whole thing of itself. Why did they choose Moab? Because those were people that were aligned with that mission of not wanting to share and take care of others. That was kind of in line with what they wanted. And they moved to Moab, and not only does Elimelech die, but then Machlon and Kehillas die. Machlon and Kehillas, before they die, marry Ruth, and between my gnosis and Beth to fill out language, I get whatever. Ruth and Orpah, okay, who actually I heard that Oprah's mother tries to name her daughter after Orpah, but messed it up a little bit. Why she would name her daughter after that, it's kind of interesting. And then these two husbands die. Then it's mother-in-law and two daughter-in-laws. Since we're all in here, on some level, might have a mother-in-law, I don't know everyone's personal circumstances. That's an interesting dynamic, okay? And now there's kind of an interesting bill to be in, because should we go home? They're kind of in this awkward position. Well, should we go back to our parents' house? Are we committed to this mother-in-law? And the mother-in-law, and they walk, and the situation in Israel gets better. The situation in Israel gets better. And Naomi realizes we can totally go home. It's time we can go home. And Ruth and Orpah walking her towards the border. Feeling like they're going to walk her home. They're going to come home with her. Not just to walk her home, escort her. We're going to come with you. And when she gets to the border of Israel, she kind of looks at them and she's like, guys, go home. And there's a few different reasons as to why she's telling them to go home. Is it because secretly she'd be embarrassed to bring back these Moabite daughter-in-laws back to Israel? Eek, that's embarrassing. Now I left a wealthy woman with a husband and two sons. Now I'm coming back alone, poor, and with these daughter-in-laws to show for it. So one opinion is that actually for her own selfishness, she was maybe let's just leave it here. And she just wanted to continue, and they were like, no, you want to come? She's like, it's okay. Opinion number two is that she actually felt really badly for them. Guys, I don't have kids for you. I don't have a life for you. Go back to your parents' house, whatever. And the last opinion, of course, the most famous, is that halachically, you're not allowed to. We're not looking for converts, right? So you have to tell a person no, and then they're like, no, I want to, no, I don't want to, no, I'm no, I want to, okay. So that's how it goes, and this was kind of that conversation. Of course, at that point, Orpah's fine, I'm out, right? I'll go home with my parents, and some of them, Mepharshim, tell us that they came from a little bit of royalty themselves. So why would I go back to this unknown land so I can have comfort? And Ruth, of course, at that point says, in that, I should number sources for the future, that she says, Ki asher tilichi, telchi ilech, b'sher ta'alini alen amich ami v'alokai. Right? These are the famous words where she says, wherever you go, I go. Wherever you lie, I lie. Your nation is my nation, your God is my God. And she continues, and at that point, when Naomi, when the mother-in-law realizes how sincere she is, but she stops urging. She stops battling with her. She realizes she's legit, she's for real, she's sincere, and they go together. And what happens from then on, I am totally happy to do next week because it's fascinating. Okay, it's my favorite part of the Megillah. But what are they actually talking about in this conversation? Which says your nation is my nation, and it's really so incredibly poetic and beautiful in and of itself. It almost doesn't need commentary. But I think for our conversation today, I think that the Gemara's approach really works very nicely with the message I'm going to try to bring home. Which is when Naomi sees that Ruth is committed to follow her, she's well, Shabbos, we can't just go wherever we want. And that's when she says, well, you go. That's fine. I can commit myself to wherever I'm allowed or not allowed to go on Shabbos. And she's well, we can't be with anybody in a private room whenever we want, yichud issues. And she's that's fine. Where you lie, I'll follow your rules. That's fine. And she's well, 613, it's a lot, And then she says, your nation's my nation. If that's what it means to be a Jew, that's fine. I'm down for it. And then she says, the whole idolatry thing, it's just, keep that at the door. We don't take it. And she's that's fine. Your God's my God. Okay. And then etc., of course, until she realizes that like Ruth is clearly determined to be with there. And the reason why I love this idea is that Ruth is really embodying the opposite of the generation. This generation is like, if it doesn't make sense to me, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to do whatever I want. Like my students, like the classic thing I hear them say is like, you do you, right? I always make fun of it. Like, you do you, right? You do what you feel comfortable with. And if you don't feel comfortable with, you should never like compromise like your comfort. Yes, I bring all of these sources for them to we have like good fight battles, okay? But this notion of that might be true that it's hard, that I can't go wherever I want on Shabbos, and I can't be with whoever I want in a private room, and I can't just bring along my childhood beliefs with me into the future. That's very, very hard. But she's totally willing to buy into it because of this sense of there's authority, and I'm willing to commit myself even if I don't always understand. And when Rav Hirsch says, then when the festival of giving, which is Shavuos, right? When the festival of the giving of the law, Shavuos, comes around once again, and I love this. He's so, like anything Rav Hirsch writes, you almost feel like you just have to say with fire and passion. All of us, not just a small court, but everyone whose fathers once swore an oath to this law at Sinai. Any one of us, who, and all Jews, once you're a Jew, right? Your grandparents stood at Har Sinai, even those who are converts. There are many, many commentaries who say that really you had ancestors that were there. Will celebrate in this law the law of their lives, the nourishment of their infancy, the enthusiasm of their youth, the enlightenment of their manhood, the joy and blissfulness of their old age, the fountain of their rebirth. And they will gather together once more and with one voice proclaim, Nasa v'nishma. Right, you and I this coming Shavuos get to choose where we're going to be in that choice. Are we going to live a Nasa v'nishma? That sometimes things don't make sense to me, and sometimes it gets hard. And when something happens on Shabbos on my rug, and I'm like, right, like I really want to clean that, right? Well, of course, right? Then that's a choice. This is a Nasa v'nishma moment, or you do you. And if it's uncomfortable for you, if it's hard for you, you should do whatever you want, right? And what kinds of mentality I'm going to take, and also understanding that choice that I make there, whether I buy into that authority or not, is going to be like send major waves to my children of this sense of authority. And sometimes I do things that I don't understand, and that's what I say to you. Sometimes I say to my kids, they're like, why do we have to? And I'm like, there are some things that I'm going to explain to you about, and there are some things that I won't. And I think it's important for our children to know that sometimes you won't understand, and guess what, not seven ishma, we do it anyways, because that's embedding within them. It's cyclical. If in your parenting relationship, there are sometimes I will explain myself, sometimes things will make sense to you, but sometimes you might not understand the reason, and sometimes I don't feel like it's appropriate for me to share the reason, but you're just going to have to trust me on this one. It's a no. That's sending a message to my children that sometimes in authority relationships, you won't always understand, that it won't always make sense. And yet, we still, not when we commit ourselves nonetheless, knowing that I know you have my best interest at heart. That I trust you, my parent, that even though I don't understand it, I know that you care for me and have my best interest at heart. And therefore, when I don't understand things with Hashem, and sometimes it's hard for me, I commit myself because I know with my whole heart that you have my best interest at heart. That this entire Torah thing isn't just random. It's totally to bring out my inner potential. But then he must be your God, and not only, I love this, not only in the quiet moments of dialogue between you and your Father in heaven, right? Not just in tefillah, not just in the tehillim, not just in our moment where we're in shul, in the sequestered chamber of the temple. He must be your God amid the marketplace with its clamor, busting life. He must be your God when you give your word to any transaction that secures well-being on earth. Of course, Judaism does not just sit in shul, right? It doesn't just sit at our Shabbos table. It's when we're waiting online in 7 Mile Market and the person in front of us is taking and we're like getting so impatient. But this is a moment where we're like, that's okay, I'm going to work on my mitzvot here and work on my patience. And this is part of being a Jew, right? That when I'm sitting in carpool and the kids in the carpool are so annoying, right? Sometimes, right? This is an opportunity for me to show that this is part of my Judaism, and that when I'm building my patience muscle, this is part of that. There's no like Jewish and non-Jewish. Everything is embodied in this thing. And I love this. This is a letter by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who, of course, like once, it's almost like so sad that when somebody passes away, their stuff becomes more meaningful. But I will say, I feel like even when he was alive, his stuff was still so meaningful. This is a letter that there's a whole book that he writes letters to his children. And this is so beyond beautiful. Sarah, David, I want to talk about children. God has blessed you both with children. They are the joy of our lives as of yours. Enjoy them. Spend time with them. Play, learn, sing, daven, and do mitzvot with them. And nothing else will your time be better spent. The love you give them when they are young will stay with them throughout their lives. Like sunshine, it will make them flower and grow. Having children is more than a gift, or it's a responsibility. For us as Jews, it's the most sacred responsibility there is. On it depends the future of the Jewish people. For 4,000 years, our people survived because in every generation, Jews made it their highest priority to hand their faith on to their children. They sanctified marriage, they consecrated the Jewish home, they built schools and houses of study, they saw education as a conversation between the generations. You shall teach these things repeatedly to your children, speaking of them when you sit at home or travel on the way, when you lie down and when you rise up. They saw Judaism the way an English aristocrat sees a stately home. You live in it, but you don't really own it. It's handed on to you by your ancestors, and it's your task to hand it on to future generations. Intact, preserved, if possible, beautified, and enhanced. And you do so willingly, because you know that this is your legacy. It's what makes your family different and special. To lose it, sell it, or let it fall into ruins would be a kind of betrayal. And that is the point. Today, on average, throughout the diaspora, one young Jew in two is deciding not to marry another Jew, build a Jewish home, have Jewish children, and continue the Jewish story. That is tragic. Your mother and I didn't spend too much time talking to you about our own family histories. But the truth is that virtually every Jew alive today has a history more remarkable than the greatest novel or family saga. It tells of how they were expelled from one country after another, how they lost everything and had to begin again. They were offered every blandishment to convert, but they said no. They sacrificed everything to have Jewish grandchildren. And today, when being a Jew demands almost no sacrifice, when we are freer to practice our faith than ever before, Jews are forgetting what it takes to have Jewish grandchildren. So how do you hand on your values? This is my favorite part. By showing your children what you love. Rav Moshe Alshech, the 16th century rabbi, asked in his commentary to the Shema, how do we teach these things to our children? How can we be sure that they will learn? His reply, the answer lies in the next two verses earlier. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. What we love, they will love. There are many reasons for the high rates of assimilation in Jewish life, but one is fundamental. We are heirs to several generations of Jews who were ambivalent about being Jewish. And I don't pass judgment on them, and neither should you. Between the 1880s and the 1930s, we lived through an age of anti-Semitism. Then came the Holocaust. Who would blame anyone in those days for saying, as did Heinrich Heine, Judaism isn't a religion, it's a misfortune. But we are long past those days. One of the greatest gifts you can give your children is to let them see you carry your identity with pride. Your mother and I tried to show you as best as we could that for us, Judaism is our legacy, our stately home, our gift from those who came before us. The greatest attempt in all of history is to create a life of justice, compassion, and love as a way of bringing the divine presence down from heaven to earth so that it etches our lives with the soft radiance of eternity. We can't live our children's lives for them. They are free and they will make their own choices, but we can show them what we love. And if you want Jewish grandchildren, love Judaism and live it with a sense of privilege and joy. The reason why I so love that is because as we approach Shavuos and we want our children or our families or even our homes, if we don't even have children yet, to have a home that's radiating with true Judaism, it's important not only to figure out, am I allowed to do this or that on Shabbos? Am I allowed to go there or not go there? Am I allowed to? That's great and that's important. That's the fabric of Judaism. But if it's not with a passion and excitement of vibrancy, then those around us won't understand why we buy into this authority. What's this all about? I told my students, and obviously it's a very interesting, mix of students where I work. But when Shabbos becomes nothing more than just Kiddush, but no one's excited about it, it's understandable why you wouldn't buy into that. I want to share probably one of my favorite sources of all time. I should make a top 10 list one day, but this is probably on it, okay? Rav Soloveitchik, who many of you might know, part of the Yeshiva University world, comes from a family that's fascinating, geniuses, to say the least, and he is also, he's in the Brisker family also, so true geniuses, okay? And his father, who was a very, very prominent Rav, and also a genius himself, so Rav Soloveitchik spoke about his mother in describing his child. I don't know, there's no I guess it's mechutanim, right? His mechutim, his child's mother, his in-law child's mother, when she passed away, he described his own mother to help understand the role of a Jewish mother, okay? And I share this because for someone who's so brilliant and can give a shir on Gemara that had people mind blown, but to hear him say this, I think just sends such a loud, powerful message. I admit that I am not able to define precisely the Masoretic role of the Jewish mother. Essentially, I'm not exactly sure when Torah talks about the role of a Jewish mother. I can't tell you exactly what Torah has in mind, he says. Only by circumscription I hope to be able to explain it. Permit me to draw on my own experiences. I used to have long conversations with my mother. In fact, it was a monologue rather than a dialogue. She talked and I happened to overhear. And what did she talk about? I must use a halachic term to answer the question. She talked about me'inyanei diyoma, which means whatever was happening during the time. If it was Shabbos, she would talk about Shabbos. If it was Shavuos, she would talk about Shavuos. I used to watch her arranging the house in honor of a holiday. I used to see her recite the prayers. I used to watch her recite the Sidra every Friday night, and I still remember the nostalgic tune. I learned from her very much. But most of all, I learned that Judaism expresses itself not only in formal compliance with the law, but also in a living experience. She taught me that there is a flavor, a scent, a warmth to mitzvot. I learned from her the most important thing in life, to feel the presence of the Almighty and the gentle pressure of His hands resting upon my frail shoulders. Without her teachings, which quite often were transmitted to me in silence, I would have grown up a soulless being, dry and insensitive. The laws of Shabbos, for instance, were passed on to me by my father. They are part of Musar Avicha. The Shabbos as a living entity, as a queen, was revealed to me by my mother. It is part of Torah Simacha. The fathers knew much about the Shabbos. The mothers lived Shabbos, experienced her presence, and perceived her beauty and splendor. The fathers taught generations how to observe the Shabbos. Mothers taught generations how to greet the Shabbos and how to enjoy her 24-hour presence. But I love the two lines in there. It's just so crazy. Is without her, you would have grown up dry, soulless, and insensitive. We're talking about a person who probably can spit back Gemara's cold, and yet without his mother's just singing in the kitchen, that would have infused within him a love for it. And probably my most favorite line is that it was all transmitted to me in silence. She didn't go out of her way to give like some speech about like, you know what? Judaism is just the best. Judaism is awesome. And never. She lived it. Her very being was, Shavuos is coming. We're going to blast up the music, depending on whether or not you keep the 7 days of whatever. Not how we don't. So music is blasting, but Erev Shabbos, it's blasting, right? And there's this sense of, if I'm not excited about it, why would they be? And very often before a holiday, you know, it can get a little stressful, right? Especially like I like to host a lot. Like that's a lot of cooking. Also, like I came after my mother who thinks like one human needs to eat like 45,000 things. So like normal standards for me are just not normal. Like, so hosting, so my kids will hear me. Do I say like, oh my God, I'm so stressed out. I have so much to do. Or do I say like, guys, who's going to help me? Like who's in, right? Shavuos is coming, right? This is what we got to do. Let's like, who's in? Like who's in the team? Like who's taking what, okay? Is there excitement or is there stress? And although we might feel stress inside, right? Remember that everything is transmitted in silence. I often say that, you know, I'll hear parents say to their kids, you know, say please and thank you. And those very same parents at the pizza store will go over to the counter and be like, a soda and fries. No, like your kids are not going to say please and thank you, right? Because you can talk till you're blue in the face about saying please and thank you, but who you are is everything that they're looking at. Because everything is transmitted in what we do and how we do, not what we say. I'm going to skip the next source, but it's a good time. But Rav Soloveitchik continues in a different place. Basically, talks about that Torah was never meant to be just intellectual. I happen to find learning Torah so stimulating. Like I want to go to a shiur and like just use my brain like it's on a roller coaster, and I absolutely love it. I find that inspiring. But he says if it stops there, then we really, really haven't understood what the Torah lifestyle is meant to be, right? It's meant to be this dialogue with Torah, this excitement of give and take, and like I'm living it, and it's expressed in my being. So now let's get somewhere. Okay, let's get back to Megillas for a second. So we started with this understanding of the generation. A generation who basically says, you do you, and like, don't let anybody tell you otherwise, okay? Like, you decide what's right and what's wrong. And Ruth comes along and essentially argues the opposite. And Ruth comes along and says, my comfort is at home. She's so cute. I want that bow for my kid. Okay, our comfort is at home, right? But I'm committing myself to a life that might not be easy at first, but it's so worth it. And even when there are times I don't understand it, I'm in because I trust that Hashem, everything that He's going to do for me is for my benefit. Like, not just like, it's all for the good. I mean, like, every mitzvah is meant to tap into a self-actualization. Like, I really, really, really believe that every mitzvah is selfish in the sense that it's meant to make me the best person I can be. That's what Hashem had in mind for Torah. Which will make sense, because in Megillas Ruth, the Gemara talks about, like, why do we even need Megillas Ruth? Like, we don't learn a lot from it. Like, it's a very beautiful story. In fact, some people think it's the beautiful romantic story. I don't think it is. Right? I actually think it's not a romantic story, but some people think it's, like, the perfect love story. Like, okay, because the story ends where, like, Ruth needs, like, someone to marry. Naomi wants Ruth to get married. I'm like, no, but who's going to want this girl? But then, like, in the field, there's Boaz, who happens to be related. It's perfect. And then, like, wait, but there's somebody else who needs to marry you before me because of, like, certain rules in the Torah. Like, he comes first, but what about me? And whatever. But then the other person really doesn't want us, and then he comes in, and then they get married. It's, like, so beautiful. Whatever. And then maybe we don't Shavuos because it's, like, the perfect romantic story. Maybe. Maybe not. Okay? Maybe we'll talk about that next time. But the Gemara answer is, like, the Medrash, wants to talk about, like, why do I need Megillas Ruths? Like, to learn romantic stories? Like, I'm sure there were plenty of romantic stories that happened during lots of different time periods. Like, this was the one that was chosen. So the Medrash says, Rabbi Zeira, Megillah zu ein balot timolot taralo Israel hator. Like, I don't learn any halachos from it. So, like, why do I need it? Lama nichtzava. Like, why was it written? To learn one lesson and one lesson, and that's the importance of doing chesed. Okay, so we're going to talk about that on a different level in a second. But if we stay on this level of being adam malakom, like me and Hashem, authority issues, right? Like, okay, this generation had authority issues. So this entire Megillah is to teach me chesed. How can that fit with this idea of authority? And I bring the Rav Matisyahu Salomon and Matnas Chaim because I think this is such a great way to understand the Megillas Ruths on one level. Most people think Megillas Ruths is the perfect chesed story because here's Ruth, she doesn't abandon her mother-in-law. Then there's Boaz, who takes care of Ruth. Like, there's never-ending chesed for each other, which kind of makes us wonder who really is the hero or heroine of the story, because everyone is doing chesed for each other. But I'm going to argue that I actually think the chesed is somewhere else, okay? And that Rav Matisyahu Salomon says, not talking about Megillas Ruths at all, but he says that he once came home and he found his Rebbetzin in the kitchen looking utterly distressed and stressed out, and she had this box, okay? They were, and she said, someone sends me this from America. I guess they were living in Israel at the time. They're not living in good, right? But at the time, I guess they were living in Israel, and she says, somebody sent me this box from America, and it looks like a very fancy, like, technology, like, machine. I don't know what to do with it, and I'm so sad because it looks like it's important. It looks very sophisticated. Somebody thought to send it to me, but, like, I actually don't even know, like, what it's meant to do, like, how to use it. Like, I'm very frustrated because I could see, like, it's something important, but I actually have no idea what to do. And he looks at his wife and he's like, so usually something like this important comes with, like, instructions. Did you check the box? And she's like, oh, that's a good idea. So she goes to check the box, and lo and behold, like, with, like, diagrams and pictures and instructions, like, all good things come with, right? Like, there's an instruction manual there. And Rav Matisyahu Salomon, continues and says that, sometimes we humans fall up on this earth. It's like a very sophisticated, thing, right? Life, people, humans, like, emotions. It's, like, very, very complicated. And we often wonder, like, I'm so confused. Like, somebody sent this to me, and I don't understand how to use it. And it's like, it's the instruction manual. Did you check the box for the instruction manual? And that's the Torah. And Rav Matisyahu Salomon says it's the greatest chesed when someone gives you the instruction manual because it gives you a clarity of life. When you look through Barnes and Noble and you see how many books are on self-help or, like, all these kinds of, like, psychology, because people are starving for clarity of purpose and meaning. Right, authors like Simon Sinek and Adam Grant and Kahneman and all these authors are so beyond popular because people are just starving for clarity on, like, how should I live my life? What's the best kind of life? How do I become my best self? And Hashem's like, I didn't leave out the instruction manual. Like all good inventors and, like, all good like smart companies, like, I left you the instruction manual of how to live the most amazing life, and that's what Megillas Ruths is reminding us. And we see Ruth committing herself to this. That's the ultimate chesed, is knowing that there's an instruction manual. And that without it, your life is habit. And without it, there's a total lack of clarity. But once I find the instruction manual, that is the ultimate chesed that Hashem can do for us, is giving us that sense of clarity, direction, purpose. And then handing it over to our children. There's this sense of, like, we have something, I remember when I was in Queens College, I was taking a summer course there. And I think that was my first exposure to, like, I went to, like, SK, which is, like, a Monroe-Dux Falls High School, and then I went to Kehillas, and then I went to Stern, and this was, like, my first, like, hello, and I was in class with, like, lots of different people, and it was psychology, and he was, like, an interesting teacher. He had, like, tattoos everywhere, cursed, like, every fifth word, but he happened to be an amazing, amazing teacher. And I remember he was talking about happiness and, like, Aristotle's definition of happiness, and this person's it was psychology, it was philosophy, and this person's definition of happiness. And I remember a girl in the front, I will never forget, and she's like, wait. So you're telling me that, like, things don't make you happy? I mean, that's just deep. And I'm like, okay, I was lucky enough to grow up in like a Jewish system since I'm little. And I'm thinking to myself, like, my second grade Mora taught me, like, like, who's happy? Somebody who's happy with what they have, not how much they have. Like, that was like Torah Judaism, like 101 since I'm like born, right? Like, but that was such a like aha moment for me of like, the things that I took for granted, like, of course we all know that like things don't make you happy is not so obvious. And that so many people are chasing things and spending endless hours at work, even though they're working for their family, but never really spending time with that family, you know, right? And like, they're you know, the cars that we have, I'm not saying we shouldn't drive that car, I'm not, God forbid, saying any of that stuff, but what I am saying is that sometimes losing, like, what's the means, what's the end, what's the goal, and what's the purpose, and the fact that we have such tremendous clarity, I think is the greatest gift that anyone could ever give anyone. I think that's like Chesed of Megillah, which is why I get read on Shavuos, right? She committed herself to a life of clarity, to a life of purpose. She grew up as a royal. She grew up as a royal. It's not easy to leave behind, and yet she still chose this. And that's why I'll end part one by saying, by Isidore Tversky, a professor, says, while there are established modes of religious behavior, there are no established modes of religious sensibility, religious experience, or measures of moving closer to God. Here, uniqueness reigns. Every halachic act is accompanied by practice of the heart, a personal, subjective, religious component. The objective act is standard unchanging. The practice is very multifaceted. Sorry to start that fast. I'm going to say my own words, but he is saying. Which essentially, let's go back to the beginning. You do you. So sometimes I can feel like, well, of course I want to be me in Judaism. Like, are you telling me that I can't be me? Like, now Seven Ishmael means like I have to think just like you and like you? And the answer is no. You do you within halacha. And I think that that is such an important thing for us not to forget. And I really want to like bring that home, which is my Shavuos table. Let's use that yesterday, Shabbos. I'm going to guess that more or less we all had the same like structure of Shabbos. In fact, I marvel that if you go anywhere to a family who's keeping Shabbos, you'll know what to expect. You'll expect there to be a Shalom Aleichem and then a Kiddush, and then everyone watches and a Hamotzi, like the Eishes Chayil. Sorry, I skipped that. Maybe they'll get brachos, maybe they won't. Okay, Eishes Chayil, it's foreign. Okay, all right, right. Then like you might assume there might be fish, there might be a funky fish, there might have a funky sauce on top. You don't really want it, right? Right? You know some structure. There are zemiros. They might sing in a different tune, but you know what to expect. It's a pretty marvelous thing that the structure of it is going to be the same no matter where you go, and yet. I'm also going to guess that no matter, you've probably never been to two of the same Shabbos tables and two different people. The feeling, the vibe, the energy, the lack of energy, right, at different people's Shabbos tables is so unique. And I think that that's, I'm moving a little bit off of Ruth for a second, a little more to Shavuos, is I think it's important for us to remember that even within Shabbos, like you do you. Like some Friday nights, just to make my kids so happy, like don't tell anybody, like, I make hot dogs. I do, right? Like, we have like fun songs. I mean, I always think it's a Shabbaton in my house because like Beth and like Shabbatons, like my kids just grew up on Shabbaton, so they don't really realize like it's not totally like a normal thing. But like, right, like there are certain things that every family gets to decide how are we going to live Shabbos. How we do Shabbos, that wasn't always up for it, right? Like that's kind of like it's told to me. But how we live Shabbos, so are we gonna sing songs or not? Do we share stories? Do we tell our Torahs? Like that's up to you. And the reason why that's so important, just to close part number one, is because when you decide how you're going to live Shabbos, that's when the excitement comes out. You can't have that transmission in silence in an exciting, positive way when it feels like I'm just doing it. Like this is what I have to do. When our kids see us picking up a sitter because we feel like obligated to do it, just get over with, like no one's inspired. You're probably not, I'm probably not. I'm not when I'm on those days. We all have those days. I'm not when I have those days. And my kids are certainly not when they see me doing that. That doesn't mean we don't commit when we're not feeling it. Of course, there's commitment here. But when they see that we've owned it, that's when they're really, really inspired. Okay, before I move on to part B, because we only have a little bit of time left, any questions, comments, memories, stories that reflect the first part? Don't be shy. Yay! You always think the first person. Yeah.
I'm Sammy, by the way.
Thank you.
I just started like an interesting conversation that now keeps being like relevant constantly. But every time I talked to like a bunch of different family members, I was speaking with one of my cousins who's like my dad's first cousin. She's like in her 40s, whatever. Like she's a full grown-up person. She's like very involved in like the conservative school that I grew up
Mm-hmm.
going to, and I was telling her a little bit about like this going on, and she was like, how like we cannot for the life of us get young people to commit to like being members of the synagogue. Like what, like why not? Like what's going on? I was like, well, first of all, like how much is membership? It's $2,200 a year. I was like, well, right there,
That might be a factor. Young families, $2,200,
like,
yeah.
$2,200 for what? Like you go for Rosh Hashanah? Like of course no one wants to pay that. But kind of just thinking about the fact that like Judaism doesn't just happen in the shul. For us, and like kind of the contrast of like it's not so crazy expensive because it's like pervasive. Like we're not only like concentrating our Jewish world in one context, that it is, spread out over like the minute to minute and the day to day of existing.
I love
kind
that.
of like bringing that, I don't know, I guess like bringing that home with kind of all these sources and everything.
Yeah, I love that. I do. I love that. And right, like meaning it's not hard to get people because Judaism. It's not like it's all or nothing. It's not in the shul or it's not in the shul.
Yeah.
Like Judaism came home with you. I also just want to say this popped into my head while you were talking. Is like I saw a lot of little children outside, which is always nice. And like sometimes little children can make things hard. Like how many diapers are inspiring? Like right, like And I remember this is totally off script, but I remember once hearing a share from Robinson Zahava Bronstein. And I was also at that time, I still have some little kids. I still have a 1-year-old baby, but like some of my kids are a little older. And at the time, I was like, diapers are just not inspiring. Like, this is just like, where is the inspiration? I remember her saying, for me, it was a very powerful mashal, and it moved me a lot, so I'll just share it for those who are through that stage. She said, if you looked at what the Kohanim did in the Beit HaMikdash, they at the end of the day, they like cleaned out like a lot of blood, like nastiness. Like there was like a lot of fat all over the floor, a lot of blood on the floor, like, and yet people revered them. Like they were the role models that everybody would have done anything to be able to trade spaces with them. Like they were considered the ultimate heroes of the Jewish generation, of the Jewish nation. And she says, like, this might sound cheesy to you, but for me, it just was very, very powerful. She says, that's exactly what Soloveitchik is saying. Like, you are the Kohanim of our home. And even though it seems nasty sometimes, the barf that we have to clean up and the diapers that we need to change, because it's all going to happen. Like, it just does. But number one is that we're charged with that trust is so empowering. Whenever people look at Judaism, especially Orthodoxy, as like belittling for women, like it's not, I'm like, you don't understand it then. Like, you don't understand that it's the total opposite. Like Rav Soloveitchik is saying, without his mother, he wouldn't have understood Judaism well. Like when your kid barfs and you're looking at them and you're saying, it's okay. Like, it's okay. And you clean it up. And that's nothing religious there. Like, that wasn't a religious moment. You weren't like, Hashem does everything for the best. Like, it just, you don't have to make everything, whatever. But, like, you just cleaned it up and said, like, I love you. And you weren't mad at them even though it was 3:30 in the morning and you had, like, an interview the next day, That is choosing to be the Kohen of your family, of cleaning up all of that nastiness with simcha and realizing that, like, I was entrusted with this like unbelievable role, that anybody would trade spaces to be in. Yeah. Any other comments? I love that one. That was really, really interesting. What you just
I've
said.
heard that idea before about the Kohen. I
Yeah.
think about every time I'm like washing the floor. Like,
Yes, I am a Kohen. I am a Kohen. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Oh, we are definitely soul sisters. The broom is my third arm, and my mom is my fourth. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to move to part 2 for a second because I think it's impossible to walk into Judaism without understanding really, really what I think Kehillas is actually really also about and how it relates to Shavuos. Okay. A few more minutes left. And that is this. There is a medrash that says that let Ruth, who converted to Judaism, who didn't renounce her mother-in-law, because she stayed committed to her mother-in-law, let her be the one to come and give rebuke to the Jewish people who rebelled against me. Like, let her be the model of what it means to be committed. In the same way that she was committed to her mother-in-law, that's going to be a model of what it means to be committed to Hashem. And we just said that on the first level, like that makes sense. But I really wanted to go one step further. Dr. Yael Ziegler, who wrote an amazing book on Ruth, writes, in other words, Ruth's behavior vis-a-vis her mother-in-law is an exemplary model for teaching Israel proper behavior towards God. Ruth demonstrates how one can vanquish one's ego in pursuit of a relationship, even when it is illogical and against one's interest to do so. In this way, Ruth teaches man how to cleave to God. I'm gonna build a theory in a second, then I'm gonna bring it home. Judaic faith and theology are linked with finite experiences and meaningful human relations. By developing proper human relationship structures, the Jew learns how to love, revere, and serve God. And essentially what I'm arguing is that sometimes our Judaism is, especially Shavuos, Na'aseh v'nishma, Hashem, like, I'm in this for you. And sometimes, especially for those of us who chose a different lifestyle than the families that we grew up in, okay, my story might be a little less impressive than your story, some of your stories, but nonetheless, it was a little bit of a different trajectory than my mother was hoping I'd go in. She definitely would pay me to wear pants if I could, and sometimes on our journey towards Amech Ami, Velokai Velokai, we can sometimes forget that there are these other people who are hurting, and these people who feel like we're changing on them. And sometimes it impacts our relationships with the people around us. And what Megillah Ruth is coming to stress more than anything is that the Torah was given. I left the source out, but it's Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Ha'ara, right? Shavuos was given. I just taught this to my students a few weeks ago. And what was unique about this moment? And Rashi there, it's almost a simple lesson, but it's almost so powerful. Is what was unique about this moment was like the first time through the desert that they weren't fighting. Like, this was a moment where they finally were united. They saw like that their differences didn't mean that they had to be divided. You might have your political beliefs and your political beliefs, but it doesn't mean we can't get along. We can agree to disagree. And it was at that moment that Hashem was like, now you're ready for the Torah. Because to live a Torah life is not just to go through the desert serving me every day. It's to understand that being a Torah Jew means to treat each other with unlimited respect. And that's where Ruth is the model for Shavuos. Because on the one hand, right, like she commits herself, and on the other hand, she never forgets the feelings of those around her, right? It's not just about the people who are less religious than us. Sometimes it's the people who are more religious than us. I often say, I think sometimes we have more tolerance for those who are less than those who are more. Honestly, I really think that's true. And she really embodied being kind to anybody. My father, who is awesomeness, I repeat this until I'm like blue in the face because I think it's just such a powerful message, especially for people today. And he says, a lot of times people can get very, very passionate about a particular topic, but they actually, if you were to ask them about like the other side, they get like very like defensive and like shut down and like it's just like crazy, like they don't know what they're talking about. Like again, if you're like a conservative, like the liberals are just like crazy, and like if you're liberal, you're like conservative, they don't know what they're talking about, right? And everyone but he says like really, a logical person would be able to say, here's the other side, here's the other point of view. I had conversations with them, I read their books, I read their articles, I cared. I want to understand, they're smart people, where are you coming from? And here's why I still believe in my side, but it's not that I don't understand the other side. I'm not disrespectful of their side. In fact, the only reason why I could have my side is because I understand the other side and I'm willing to listen. That's true respect, is I really want to hear where you're coming from. You're a smart person. I might disagree with you at the end, but that's okay. So Rav Jacobsen, and with this we'll end the last four sources, says, Yesh shtuim, there are shtuim in Hebrew, it's like stupidity, sorry. Like there are not so smart people. Like there are some people who think like, classic, my back to Phila students will say like, and I'll say in Bnei, I'll say on both sides, it's kind of like obviously like culturally fascinating for me, is like in BT, they'll be like, why does God care about like the details? It's almost like be nice to your friend, be a good person, whatever. Okay, but yeah, be a good person, good, okay. And then in Bnei, they might say things like, very being adam makomi, like how could people like not keep blah blah blah, whatever, right? Like very like being adam makom, like not understanding like there's like differences in the universe, not everyone grew up like you, And he says like there that our connection to Hashem is really through our social interactions. And he says it's very, very deep. He says, Kishkasher Adam hu egotist, egocentric. I think this is so gorgeous. I have to read it in the Hebrew. He says when someone is egotistical or egocentrist, they're the center of their universe. Right? And they think that the whole world revolves around them. Such a person will have a very hard time making space for Hashem in their life. But when I can make space in my life for somebody else, for other ideas, for other, viewpoints, When I'm able to understand that it's not all about people who think like me can be in here, and people who dress like me or who grew up like me can be in here. No, the circle of I gets wider and wider, right? Like I love those who maybe more and less, right? I love those who believe with me politically or not. The I just is a wide spectrum of I. Such a person it's not all about me, that's the kind of person who can make space for Hashem in their life, because it's not about you and your ego and like we said in the beginning, that first source, that they live their life, Isha Yasher Beinav Yaseh, like I just do whatever I want because it's about me. There's an ego here. A person who has the humility to allow other people and differences is the kind of person who can allow Hashem in. And that's why I think Shavuos really ends after a time period of mourning or Bnei students who lacked in V'ahavta L'recha Kamocha. When you're not, a rock star Jew is not just Na'aseh V'nishma. It's also V'ahavta L'recha Kamocha. Like those are not, it's not this and that. It's one and the same. It's one in the same. There's a quote by my husband's great-grandfather, Rav Breuer, who was the Rav in Washington Heights, a very, very prominent rabbi, and he said, I don't want to mess it up, but he said, hold on, oh, I got it now. There's Glat Kosher and Glat Yasher. Glat Kosher is like the utmost perfect, like, kosher standards. But then there's Glat Yasher, but do we treat people with the utmost perfect standards like we would with our meat? Am I triple making sure that just like the meat was shechted by the right person at the right time in the right way, that I cooked it and I did it in the right way, am I also overly analyzing that I made sure not to hurt anybody's feelings around me? That is a well-rounded Jew. And that's why I end with the following two ideas. The Or Yechaskel says, sometimes people will really mess up their understanding of Torah. I probably give this talk once a month to some teenager out there who's like, I hate Judaism. I'm like, well, wait, just 1 second, okay? All right, hold on, okay? And I don't think you get it. Like, they're like, well, I have to daven, it's so boring. Okay, fine. We have to work on, like, making things exciting, right? Personalizing, like, that Tversky piece of, like, individualizing our mitzvos. But he says, sometimes people don't understand that Ikra Avodah Chovosenu Hi Avodah Tikkun HaLevavos. It's the third line. That our main avoda of being Jews, our main task is to work on our personalities and our character traits, our midot. And the entire Torah and every mitzvah in it is just the treadmill to building the muscles or the weights to building better personality. That's what Torah is. When the Torah, the most obvious, obviously, there's some of the obvious ones, like tzedakah, okay, obviously. Like, okay, so the more, and even when the halachos of tzedakah, like that the ideal way is giving someone a job, because that's not embarrassing for them. But even like if you have a $100 bill, is it better to give it all to one person or to numerous people? Like, there's so much wisdom, because it's all about what's the best treadmill for you to build the best character traits. How are we going to come out as patient, non-judgmental, humble, inquisitive, respectful, loving human beings? Again, just like Rebbetzin Solomon was completely lost in with this machine and there was an instruction manual. That's right. Every single person in the universe wants to feel like they're living their life's mission and they're actualizing their strengths. It's a terrible feeling, I've had that at work, where you feel like I have all these strengths that I'm not using. It stinks. It stinks. And Hashem's like, I gave you the instruction manual. Read it. Read it and use it. Sometimes I tell my students, like, just try it. Just do it. Like, you'll see. Like, you can see someone working out at the gym and they, like, come off in this, like, high. And you look at them and you're like, you're sweating. You're hot. That did not look fun. I don't want to do that, right? But they're on a high. If you get on the treadmill and you run, they'll be on a high, right? They'll be on a high. You just got to live it to understand it, right? And I want to end with, I'm in the middle of a book called Atomic Habits, which I'm sure some of you may have heard. It's like been on a top seller list for a long time. Are you like reading it?
I'm reading it right now.
Yeah, me too. Well, book club. It's actually fantastic. It was like recommended a few times, and like I saw, like, habits may transform your life. I'm like, I've read like too many of these books. Like, okay, small habits, big changes. Like blah blah. No, it's actually worth reading. It turns out it's really, really good. There's a reason why it's on the top list. It's fantastic. Sorry for my cynicism, but it actually is very, very good. And one of his quotes, that I just thought really related to this whole idea is every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. No single instance will transform your beliefs, but as the votes build up, so does the evidence of your new identity. I love that quote. Like, every time that I do something, I'm saying, like, I'm choosing, it's not just a Torah lifestyle, it's a Torah personality. It's a Torah person. You know, like, they say that Talmidei Chachamim are called walking Sifrei Torah because it makes sense. It's more inspiring sometimes to watch someone live Torah. You know, in my Shabbos table, I try to, like, Rav Pesach Krohn has these beautiful stories, like these really, really inspirational. Not like, you know, you moved your parking spot and like the tree fell down and like you're so lucky that, like, you know, whatever. Those are nice too. But like really beautiful stories of chesed and strength and courage. And I share those with my kids because honestly, they learn a lot of Torah in school. They go to TI. Thank you TI for letting me photocopy these this morning in their school. Thank you. But I just want to end by saying that sometimes you learn a lot of Torah. I have no idea where my train of thought was. Stories. I need to do it this morning. Didn't have enough Snapple. That's my caffeine. Sorry. It's so beautiful to learn Torah. I love it. But the stories totally help make it real. You know, like when I tell my kids about a kid their age in TI, true story, who I don't even know why I'm sharing this story, but it's just so beautiful, that the Rebbe was going from kid to kid, having them like read. That's just like classic Rebbe thing to do. And one of the kids who was like the top of the class was reading like particularly slowly. And it was like almost like agitating. Also, like, you're smart, so like, why are you doing this? And day after day, the kid would like, B'yamim ha'hein. And the Rebbe's like, oh, you're smarter than I don't know what's going on. And he called him over one day and he said, what's going on? And he said, the kid behind me. How amazing. The kid behind me is not a fast reader. And if I read it like I ordinarily would read, it would make him look bad. I want to cry seeing that story. Like, it's amazing. That's Torah. Like, you don't see that story everywhere. That's amazing. That's a Torah life. That's a Torah personality. And like when you share these kinds of stories with your kids, it makes them realize, like, of course they learned about chesed in school. They learned about being sensitive in school. When you share, like, no, there's a real story that happens. It makes them realize, like, oh, I can be that too.